Hey, welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast. I'm Chad Brown. I'm your host, and back today with Aaron Dalton. How's it going, Aaron?
Good. Glad to be back.
Well, we have been talking in multiple episodes about the grid rules.
And here we are. Finally ready to talk about the deep dive.
Finally ready to talk about the grid rules. And once again, like everything else, we got in there and started looking and said, no way we could do this. no, absolutely no way we could do this in one episode. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through sort of just the basics of the grids. We're going to introduce you to the grids and just tell you what they are, where they are in the process, how they work. And then we're going to come back and do another episode, boots on the ground, real hypothetical. Is that a thing? Real hypothetical? They're probably our former clients in some anyway, regardless, it's going to be hypotheticals. And we're going to go through some basic examples because I do believe, I know, back early in the day, they used to talk about the grids as sort of the holy grail of disability. It really is, it's the reason why age matters. It's the reason why age education have such a huge role in whether you're actually able to be found disabled. And to jump to sort of the end, I think it's also the reason that you may know people that are on disability and you're like, I don't understand why they're on disability. Because the beauty of the grid rules is you do not have to prove someone is unable to do any work at all in the national economy on a sustained basis. If you can fit inside the grid rule and it directs that you are disabled, the judge who's deciding your case, the agency that's reviewing your case, they have to find you disabled. So with that, let me give it just a real brief introduction to what the grid rules are, and then I want to go through today and sort of show people where they are in the process, the different components, what they mean, so you have a framework of understanding. It's funny, framework, because the grid rules are framework. Here we go. So you'll have a framework of understanding when we work through the hypotheticals, how they make sense. So generally, the grid rules are at step 5 of the sequential evaluation process. And they look primarily at 4 things. They look at your RFC. We just did an episode on RFC, maybe 2. Did we do 2?
I think it was a 2-part.
I think it was. I can't remember. So go watch the episodes on RFC where we explain what that is. And then it looks at your age, education, and work experience. And it sort of takes these 4 factors, puts them together in this complex set of charts. And it's really just sort of one of these. You sort of go up and down and over and look, and it's this disabled or not disabled. So start with, just remind people very briefly, because we got a lot to cover, remind them briefly what the 5 steps of the sequential evaluation process are, because this is going to be at step 5.
Yes. So in adjudicating the case, Social Security looks at 5 steps in order. First, they look at, are you above SGA? We did an episode on that. They look to make sure that you do actually have a medically determinable severe impairment at step 2. Step 3, do you meet or equal a listing? Step 4, can you go back to your past relevant work? And then at step 5, looking at, is there any other work in the national economy that you can do?
Right. And so just to understand sort of how this works, when you get to step 4 of the process, the burden is on the claimant. And for you may not know what that means. Basically, it means you're the one that has to prove the thing that has to be proved. The burden falls on you. So you have to prove that you are unable to perform your past relevant work, jobs you've done in the past 5 years. And then if you can show you can't do your past relevant work, it jumps to step 5, and now the burden shifts to the government. So I don't really know. And the grids lay a framework for helping the decision maker, let's just say the judge, determine whether you can return to full-time competitive work in the national economy. And the grids are really sort of the starting place. The grids are really just three charts, right? I think there's 3. Yes. There's 3 primary charts. So let's walk through what the components of those charts are. Remember, you've gone through the process. You're at step 5. Excuse me. Now the burden's on the government. And they're going to look at 4 components. One, they're going to look at RFC, or your residual functional capacity. So just briefly, what's the RFC and what are sort of the different ranges that they could make a decision that you're in?
So the RFC is the judge's assessment of the most that you can still do in light of all of your medically determinable impairments. So there's usually with the grids, there's three main categories that are going to be relevant. There's sedentary, which is essentially a seated job. There's light, which is going to be mainly standing, and then it also looks at how much weight can you lift and carry, 10 to 20 pounds. And then there's medium, which is also primarily standing, but lifting and carrying 25 to 50 pounds.
Right. And so the judge is going to make a determination. The maximum amount you can do is not the minimum amount you can do. It's the maximum amount you can do, which
on
is
a sustained basis.
On a sustained basis. And they're going to put you in a category. Now, let's just back up a second. You may disagree, and you may disagree with the judge's assessment, but this is how the framework is designed to operate. So they're going to say you can do sedentary work, that is, you can lift up to 10 pounds, you're sitting 6 out of 8 hours. You can do light work. You can basically stand or walk 6 hours out of 8 hour shift. You can lift up to 20 pounds, 10 pounds frequently, or medium or heavy or very heavy. We're not going to drive into a deep dive here. Like I told you before, we have a whole episode on RFC and how it's calculated and why it's important. And it does matter. And one of the reasons it matters is it's one of the foundational components of the grid. So let's just say, presume the judge comes up with the RFC, whatever it is. Then they're going to look at age, education, and your past work experience. So let's just start with age. It matters what age you are, but they use categories. So what are the age categories that they're going to look at?
The first one is younger individual, and in Social Security world, you are young up until you hit age 50.
Right.
Between age 50 to 54, we're an individual closely approaching advanced age.
Right.
Starting at age 55, we are an individual of advanced age.
Right.
And those are the main ones, but there's also closely approaching retirement age, which is age 60 and over.
Yeah. I think practically the rules apply. There's very limited difference in how they apply between advanced age and closely approaching retirement age. There are different boxes on the grids, but by and large, the result's going to be the same. So when if you've had any conversations or watched any video about disability or had any sort of study in this at all, you realize immediately almost everyone, the first question we ask people is, how old are you? Yes. And the reason is this, the Social Security Administration and the regulations as a framework, there's that word again, as a framework generally take the position that as you become older, it becomes more difficult for you to transition to other types of work. Therefore, a really good general takeaway is the older you are, the easier it is to get disability. And the younger you are, the more difficult it is to get on disability. So a case, for example, that comes in from a screening standpoint, we get a lead, they come in from the internet or a referral or another lawyer, whatever it is. And that person is 47 years old, they're going to be a younger individual, so they're going to have a much tighter scrutiny because we know that it's more difficult. And one of the reasons we know it's more difficult is the grid rules are less favorable to younger individuals than they are someone who's advanced age. Okay, so you're going to have your RFC, then you're going to have your age category. So we got age, now we have education. So let's talk about, once again, education falls into sort of ranges. It's just what are the education categories that they're going to talk about?
So we are looking at high school graduate or above. Then there's limited education, which is sort of less than high school, but you maybe had a little bit of high school in there. And then there's marginal education, which is usually middle school or thereabouts. And then there's essentially illiterate, which unable to read or write.
Yeah, and then there's been some change in the regulations in recent years dealing with illiteracy. I know years ago it was basically literacy in English. Now they look at that differently. But you start to understand. And at one level, a lot of things in the disability process don't seem to make any sense. But this is one of the things I think makes a lot of sense. So if you look at someone, for example, who has marginal education, that's typically going to be 6th grade or below. Well, it's not difficult to look at someone who has a 4th grade education and realize, especially in 2026 economy, there are very limited options that person is going to be able to perform work in the national economy. I'm not saying someone with a fifth grade education can't be successful and can't work. What we're saying is, as a general rule, as sort of a presupposition coming into the process, it's presumed that it's going to be more difficult. And then as you move up the categories, so you have limited education, which is 7th to basically 11th grade, you start to realize, okay, well, this person probably has basic math skills. They have basic reading skills. But really, there's no reason to presume they have much more than that. And then you get into people who have a high school education or more. High school doesn't necessarily mean you can move into skilled work, but you start to realize the more education you have, the more likely it is that you're going to have a sort of an intellectual skill set, for lack of a better phrase, that allows you to do more things. So once again, lead comes in, they call, they're like, well, why do you care how much education I have? Like, why does that matter? And it matters because the more education you have, the more likely it is that the rules are going to work to say you can transition to other jobs. The less education you have, the less likely it is you can transition to other jobs. And so you start to see how this works. We have our RFC, which is determining exertionally what we can do. Sit, stand, walk, push, pull, carry, lift, the magic 7 exertional activities. And then this is where we sort of have this somewhat difficult conversation with people. Well, I know having a lot of education helped you in your career, but it's not helpful for your disability case.
Right.
I know that you really don't have any education, and that's been really difficult for you most of your life, but good news.
It helps you today.
It's going to help you today, right? So they look at age, they look at education, and then the final thing they're going to look at is your past work experience. Just like everything else, they're going to put it into categories. So what are the general categories of work experience they're going to look at?
Unskilled, which is looking at the time it takes to achieve sort of average performance in the job. So typically unskilled work, it takes 30 days or less to learn. Semi-skilled work is going to take more in the 6-month range. Skilled work, typically 7 months or more. And so sometimes clients are saying, why are you saying that I'm unskilled? It's not a dig at you. It's just talking about how long it took you to learn the job.
Yeah, it's not personal.
Right.
We don't think you're an unskilled human.
Right.
We're just saying that the work you've done in the past was able to be learned in a very short amount of time. Right. And once again, it like I said, there are a lot of things about the process that don't make any sense, but this really does, because if you're someone who doesn't really have job skills, then the amount of jobs, the number of jobs that you're going to be able to transfer to, because remember, we've shown in step 4 that you can't do your past relevant work. Right. So what we're looking at in step 5 is your ability to transition into other types of jobs. Not a job you may actually be able to find.
Totally different question. Yes.
Question. And I've had so many conversations with clients over the years, and like, well, I don't even know what that job is. And I'm like, okay, you're missing the point a little bit. The point is you have the ability to transition and learn to do that job. So once again, if you're someone who has worked in a basically unskilled environment, then the reality is you're not going to have a lot of options to you in the event you can't do your past work. But let's say, I know one of the examples that we're going to talk about in next episode is an RN. If you're a registered nurse, you're at a relatively high skill. I mean, that's a skilled job. I think it's SVP 7. And to do that job, understand what a skilled job is a job that requires you typically to have skills in multiple areas. So when you have, if you think sort of from greater to lesser, if you have a job that has 5 core skill sets and you're proficient in those skill sets, then it's reasonable to think that you might be able to do another job that only requires 2 of those 5 skill sets that you have. And we get into this final issue, which is we have RFC, we have age, we have education, we have work experience, and then we're going to look at this reality that some jobs have transferable skills and other jobs don't. So could you just real briefly talk about what are transferable skills, how are they going to factor in the process, and then I'll try to wrap it up and put it back together for us.
Sure. So transferable skills, the reason they come in at the grids is essentially Social Security thinks that if you can take these skills and move them into a different or similar line of work, then there's not as high a burden for you in adjusting to other lines of work. So with transferable skills, some of the things we're looking for are is your job pretty industry specific? So electricians, plumbers, highly skilled jobs, but they're pretty industry specific. You can't take the skills of being a plumber and go and do something in a totally different line of work. Whereas like with nurses, there's lots of different jobs in the healthcare field that some of those skills might move to.
Yeah, and some people get frustrated in the process too because they're in sort of generic administrative like positions which transfer to lots of different types of jobs, and someone else has a very specific skill set, and even though they're a higher skilled employee, they really don't have the ability to transfer those. So, but understand in the process, in assessing your past relevant work or your past work history and classifying it inside the grids, they're going to make this distinction between transferable and non-transferable job skills or lack of job skills. And that's going to factor into the equation. So there are other issues. There's more nuance to this.
Oh, there's always more.
Yeah. And then you get into this issue of like sometimes vocational experts. We did an episode on that too. Maria Vargas came and talked to us. So check that out if you don't know what a vocational expert is. The vocational expert sometimes doesn't understand that Social Security has a definition, even though it's not very clear at times.
Yes.
They try to define it.
It's an open-ended definition.
It really is, but they'll say things like, well, they can answer the telephone. Well, that's not really a skill.
Right.
I mean, the fourth grade education person could, my kids when they were 3 or 4 could answer the telephone, right?
Now, if we're setting up conference calls and working on a multi-line, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But if we're just hitting answer, that's not a skill.
So you get into sort of some nuance of what is a skill, what is not a skill, the degree to which it can be transferred into similar or different industries, and that's sort of the framework. So I think the big takeaway, though, for people is understand the grids are, in some respects, the holy grail of disability. And the reason is if you can make it into one of those boxes, and that box dictates that you are disabled, the judge does not have the discretion to make their own determination, even if they disagree. Sometimes you run into judges who clearly don't like the grids. They don't like the fact that this is supposed to be the part of the process where I'm making a final decision and you're forcing my hand by the regulation to rule one way or another. And that's very powerful because what you'll find very frequently, one of the factors that goes into a disability case, I think it's going to be linked in the bottom of this. We have our new Is Your Disability Case a Winner guide where you can go through and look at the factors that determine whether the strength of your disability case. So check that out in the show notes. There'll be a link for it. But one of the primary factors is the ALJ. And when you study ALJ approval ratings, inevitably what you see is judges with very low approval ratings typically approve people who are 55 or older. The reason they're approving them is not because they're just more generous to that age group, right? The reason the 22% approval judge is paying people at 55 is because the grids are telling them they don't have a choice, right? And so when you're dealing with marginal to poor approval rating ALJs, it's very important to have the grid rules in your pocket because they're going to give you the ability to press that judge to pay you. So we're out of time, as always. Grid rules are very, very valuable. They're misunderstood at some levels, but at one level, they're very simple. They determine an RFC, what's the most you can do, and then they look age, education, work experience. And so you check a box for age, check a box for education, check a box for work experience, and you sort of go up or down one of the charts. There's a grid for sedentary, there's a grid for light, there's a grid for medium. So you pick the right chart based on RFC, and then you sort of follow the lines, and it has a box. Now, one thing to remember, though, is that it only looks at exertional. So if you have non-exertional limitations and the grid rules say you're not disabled, it doesn't mean you're going to lose your case.
Right.
It just means that the judge isn't being forced basically by the rules to approve you. So we'll get into that a little bit more in our examples. Next time in our examples, we're going to pull some non-exertionals in there. But for that, the grid rules are powerful. You need to understand them. That's why the lawyer's asking you these basic questions about these core historical components of work and education, and are really interested in how old you are. But that's all the time we got. The grid rules, we did it. We got through the basics. Next time we'll give you some really good examples so you can see how they apply in real life. Till then, thanks for watching. Subscribe.